Good evening, Sukihotu. Welcome once again, joining us today in this live Dhamma sharing on Facebook. We are now doing the Awakening series number 3. Today is a very special session because after the first 2 sessions of the Awakening series on Panchakanda, I received quite a number of questions. And for some reason, they didn't put the questions when we were live. But anyway, I have those questions, and I'm going to answer them, quite a number of them. So today, this is the Awakening Series number 3, 21st June 2021. And we are covering the topic Panca Upadana Kanda, the process of perception, 5 constituents of the process of perception. Before we move on, I would like to share with you this link. Please download the PowerPoint slides so that you can follow along, tiny.cc/awakening3. So please feel free to follow along with these PowerPoint slides that I will be flashing on the screen. So, all right, so without further ado, let's begin and take a look at what are the questions that we have been receiving. Well, there are 7 major questions. I will deal with them one by one, so I won't go into this right now. So let's do the first one. And the first question is that I mentioned in one of the previous sessions that in the Panchakanda, the 5 aggregate, and this is only with respect to the 5 aggregates, the Panchakanda, right, the process of perception, that vedna, feeling, and sanya, sensation, are inseparable. They go together. And why is that? So today, I will share with you the explanation why these 2 go together and they are inseparable insofar as the Panchakanda is concerned. First, let's take a look at this Panchakanda, the process of perception. There are 5 constituents, rupa, which is mental image. Then there is vedana, the feeling, and sanya, the sensation. And we learned from the previous sessions, millions and millions of these sanya vedana pairs are brought into the brain to be processed, and they are constructed together into a big picture. And Bhante Punnaji calls this like building a wall with bricks, piece by piece. So that's what he was referring to it. Piece by piece, every piece of brick makes up the whole wall. My term would be that they are like pieces in a jigsaw puzzle. Because all bits and pieces, millions of them, moment to moment, so they are constructed together to form the big picture, the vijnana, which is the big picture in the mind. Vijnana is the perception of the object that you either see with your eyes, something you heard with your ears, aroma you smell, or flavors that you tasted, or tangible objects that you touch. And that's how this Panchakanda works. They construct that into this big picture. But these bits and pieces, the sanya, vedana, they are inseparable because you cannot have sanya without vedana, and you cannot have vedana without sanya. Let's examine each of these senses. Stimulation of the sense organs. Let's look at this stimulation of sense organs triggers the sensation. This is the sanya. Right, the nerve cells in each sense organ detects or senses the stimulation, and there is a impulse generated, and that is the stimulation. And that impulse generated is relayed to the brain to be processed. That is the sanya, the sensation that is picked up by the nerve cells in each sense organ. And at the same time, when these nerve cells pick up the sensation, the nerve cells are also aroused by the sensation, and this arousal is vedana, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. So let's take a look at each one, the sanya vedana pair, and why eventually I will explain with a demonstration why they are inseparable. First, let's look at each sense. We talk about seeing, the sight, sense of sight. Sense of sight is basically the reflected light entering the eye, stimulating the light-sensitive cells on the retina, right? And basically, these are the optic nerve cells. When light strikes on them, there is a stimulation and there is an impulse generated, and that is the sensation, sanya, that is being brought to the brain to be processed. At the same time, the frequency of light will affect the this light-sensitive optic nerves. And if you recall, in the last two sharing, we talked about yellow and red light are irritating to the optic nerves. Blue and green, they are soothing to the optic nerves. And this irritation is the unpleasant feeling, vedana. And the soothing sensation is this pleasant feeling of vedana. So you have pleasant and unpleasant, right? So that is really how the pleasantness and unpleasantness feeling when the optic nerves are being stimulated, and that stimulation triggers the sanya and arouses the vedana. They go together. Now, I can't demonstrate this because it's not easy to demonstrate, but I can demonstrate the touch later on. Let's talk about the other senses first. Then we talk about hearing. Hearing is really air vibrations entering the ear, striking the eardrum. And when it strikes the eardrum, it vibrates the eardrum, which then vibrates three tiny little bones called ossicles. They have the function of amplifying the signal, which then in turn vibrates a little thing called the cochlea. And inside this spiral cochlea, it is filled with fluid, and also there is auditory nerve ending with hair at the end of it. So that inside the cochlea, as the fluid vibrates, the hair moves, and then, of course, the auditory nerves will be triggered. And there is a sensation. That is the sanya in the auditory nerves. Now, we also spoke about the sound, right? When we hear a sound, then the sound has two major qualities, right? The sound can be loud or soft. That is called amplitude. But the sound can also have high frequency, which is high pitch, and low frequency, which is low pitch. And we have also learned that high pitch sound is irritating, and low pitch sound tends to be soothing. So high pitch sound produces unpleasant vedana, and low pitch sound produces a more pleasant vedana, right? So that is the hearing. Then, of course, we have smell, which really is the odorant molecules binding with receptors in the olfactory bulb deep inside your nose. Right? In that area called the olfactory bulb, there are a lot of nerve endings which are detecting molecules of aroma, and they bind with each nerve ending will bind with a specific type of molecule, so you will be smelling different types of aroma. Certain aroma will irritate the olfactory cells, and certain aroma may soothe it. For example, if you talk about, let's say somebody's cooking a very spicy curry, that very pungent curry aroma is irritating, right? Make people sneeze. Right? On the other hand, sometimes you might walk into the garden and you come across beautiful flowers that smell very sweetly, and that smell is soothing, right? So you have soothing vedana and irritating vedana. Goes together with the sensation. When these aroma molecules bind with the receptor cells in the olfactory bulb, it triggers that sensation called sanya. Right? So sanya, vedana goes together. And of course, we have taste. Taste is basically the flavor molecules of various type of flavor molecule reacting chemically with these gustatory sense receptors in your taste buds. So as soon as these flavor molecules hits comes into contact with your taste buds, then the taste buds will react. So it produces a sensation, and that is the sanya, and certain flavors will trigger unpleasant sensations, certain flavors will trigger more pleasant sensation. For instance, if in terms of a very spicy curry, it doesn't matter whether you like curry or you don't like curry. The point is that very spicy and pungent foods like very spicy curry, right? When they come into contact with your tongue, your taste buds, it triggers an unpleasant sensation. On the other hand, some cooling foods, right, mint, they produce a pleasant sensation. So that is the vedana, right? The pleasantness and unpleasantness is the feeling we call vedana. Now I can demonstrate to you the touch part. It's easy to demonstrate that, okay? In the case of touch, we learned that there are many different types of receptor cells under the skin. Some will sense pressure, some will sense vibrations, some will sense temperature, and some will react chemically to pain, to chemicals, and so on, right? So what happens is that the moment these receptor cells under the skin senses either the vibration or the temperature or whatever, that is the triggering of the sensation called sanya. And certain sensations are unpleasant, right? And that unpleasantness is the feeling vedana. Now, why do they go together? Why is it that when there is sanya, there is vedana? Where there is vedana, there is sanya. You cannot have sanya without vedana. You cannot have vedana without sanya. I'll show you. Let's take example. We talk about touch. If I were to strike the hand like that, right? That striking of the hand, the moment I strike the hand, it actually stimulates the touch receptors under the skin. And that produces that sensation, the sanya. At the same time, if I strike the hand hard, it causes an unpleasant sensation. The pain receptors will react. The pain receptors will get excited. So that unpleasant sensation, that is the vedana. So when I strike the hand, sanya is sensing the striking. Vedana is whether this striking is painful or soothing. So if I strike it like that, then the sanya will sense it, and the vedana will experience the unpleasantness of that striking, the hard striking. On the other hand, instead of striking it, I just gently pat it, and that produces a soothing sensation. So the moment I pat the hand, then the touch receptors will sense that the stroking, that is sensation, that is sanya. At the same time, this stroking is soothing, that is vedana. So you cannot have sensing the stroking without experiencing the pleasantness. Just as if I strike it, you cannot have sensing the striking without experiencing the pain. You cannot strike like that and there is no experience of pain. I mean, the pain may not hurt you because this is not a very serious strike unless I use a pin. But the point is, you cannot do that and at the same time not feel the vedana, right? So sanya, vedana go together. At the same time, if you are feeling a sensation, feeling the pleasantness or unpleasantness, then there must be some physical contact with the skin. Otherwise, how can you feel the pleasantness? So there you can then realize that sanya, vedana must go together. So I hope that answers your question, right? That sanya, vedana are inseparable. The same with your light entering the eye. If it is high frequency, the moment the high frequency light strikes the light sensitive cells in the retina, that is sensation. And that high frequency light is more soothing than the low frequency light. And that is vedana. They go together. They cannot be inseparable. Right? They are inseparable. So I hope that answers the first question. Moving on. The next question is, what is the difference between the different types of sense perceptions versus consciousness? And how are they different? I think this question relates to the translation of the word vijnana. Vijnana is commonly translated by many Western translators as consciousness. But we have to be very careful in using the term consciousness. Right? You can say sense consciousness. You cannot say just consciousness, because the word consciousness by itself has a much deeper meaning than you think. In today's world, if you ask any scientist, whether you ask any psychologist, psychiatrist, you ask any medical doctor, you ask any surgeon, you ask any neuroscientist, brain scientist, basically when they use the word consciousness, they are referring to the awareness of a self with respect of the environment. So in other words, the term consciousness by itself, without any qualification, the term consciousness usually refers to the awareness of a self in the world, a self with respect to an environment. But if we talk about each sense organ like the eye, seeing a dog out there, the eye, the vijnana produced by the eye, that means the eye vijnana, the eye is called Chakku. The vijnana produced by the eye is called Chakku vijnana. Well, Chakku vijnana is not aware of a self in the world. It is only aware of the object that was perceived. Right? So it was just picking up light reflected from the object. And that is the Chakku vijnana. There is no association with the self whatsoever. So you cannot call Chakku vijnana as consciousness. But of course, you can qualify the word by saying eye consciousness. Right? So now let's look at all those terms. Now, as I mentioned, this is with respect to the translation of vijnana. Punnaji has translated vijnana as sense perception with respect to the 5 physical senses, but he also says it is consciousness with respect to the mind. So now let's look at the different types of vijnana. Sense perception. When we talk about the eye, the Chakku, then Chakku vijnana is the eye, you can call it the eye consciousness, but basically it is the eye perception. Right? So if you qualify the word consciousness with respect to the sense organ, then that is correct. That it's only the sense organ that is conscious of sensing something. That's okay. You can use that word consciousness in that respect. But you cannot use the word consciousness by itself. As I pointed out, it has a much deeper meaning, universally accepted. Of course, there are some people who will keep arguing about this, but there is no argument. You talk to any psychologist, psychiatrist, neuroscientist, medical doctor, whatever, the word consciousness is more than just being aware of something. It's really being aware of the environment with respect to a self. That's really what that word consciousness means. Then, of course, we have the ear consciousness, the sota vijnana, and we have the smell, taste, and touch. These 5 sensory consciousness. These are called perceptions. So the more accurate word is perception, because sense organs are perceiving objects in the environment, perceiving a visual objects, what you see with your eye, perceiving an auditory object, what you hear with the ear, perceiving an aromatic object, which is what you smell with your nose, and perceiving a flavor object, which is what you taste with your tongue, and perceiving a tactile object is what you touch with your body. And all these are then processed in the mind itself, and that processing is the manovinyana, and that is called cognition. You can also now call this consciousness. Manovinyana is consciousness. So it is basically the process of identifying what was perceived by the sense organ, and at the same time recognizing, right, being aware of the image, the rupa, and assigning a label or a name, the nama, to identify what it is. And there is the cognizing the experience and creating concepts, the stories behind what you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. Then that story basically breaks that experience into subjective, objective, subjective. And that objective, subjective really produces the notion that there's a world out there and there is a self in here. That is just projected by the mind. I'll come to that a little bit later about that. But basically, this is why the word vijnana is best translated as perception when we talk about the 5 physical senses. And we can call it consciousness when we talk about the mind, the mano vijnana. Okay. So now let's take a look at this situation. The eye picking up light from the environment, reflected light, that is brought to the mind. And then in the mind, it arises as a mental image, rupa. The same with all the other senses. The ear, hearing air vibrations from the environment. It's a sound producing the mental image of a auditory sound, right? So that is the saddha vijnana, right? So, sota vijnana. So the sound is the saddha, okay? So these are the different Pali words describing the perception that arises. They are mental images of that perception. So they are then put together by mano. And mano basically is interpreting by drawing from memory of the past. We become aware of an object because we have seen similar objects of the same kind, hundreds of them. Therefore, we categorize them and we're able to identify them. I've already explained this identification process called papancha, so I won't go much further into that. So basically, this is the reason why these are perceptions. Now let's listen to what Bhante Punnaji has to say about that, okay?
Someone came and asked Buddha a question. We have these 5 senses, and each sense will give different information. The eye, the information we get from the eye is different from the information we get from the ear. It is a sound. And nose gives another kind of information. The tongue gives another kind of information. Now these different informations, they are different. But we mix these things together. Where does that mixing come? Where do they unite?
In the mind.
Then the Buddha said, Mano. Mano is the place. And today, if we use the modern scientific thinking, all these information going from the senses go to the brain. And the brain begins to do the thinking. Put that information together and compare it with the past experiences and gives a meaning. So when I see a person coming here, if I have seen that person before, I will know that person. Or if I don't, at least I will see whether it is a man or a woman. Or whatever it is.
Yes.
So the meaning is given by the thinking part, which is mano, which is the activity of the brain. There is no thinker as a separate person. It is the brain, and there is a part of the brain called the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex, which is doing the thinking. And mano really is not another person there or anything, but the body itself. The brain is a part of the body.
So Bhante was referring to that bringing together is in the mano. So this is what happens. The mano vijnana is cognition, right? Or it's really consciousness, being aware of objective experience and subjective experience, and bringing it all together, creating the notion that there is a world out there when these 6 sense perceptions are put together, right? So in other words, it puts 5 physical sense perceptions are put together, and together with the mind, there are 6 of them, and they 6 types of vijnana, and then they come together in the mind, and then you begin to have the notion that there is a world out there, the objective experience, and there must be something in here, and that the mind creates this notion there is a self in here that is experienced this world, this environment. That is, this self is mind-made. We are going to explain much deeper about this when we come to the Paticca Samuppada discussion later in one of the next few sharings, not now. It's quite a deep topic on that one, how the self arises. So we'll come to that later. But the fact that the word consciousness, I just want to highlight again that the word consciousness can only be used when we refer to mano vijnana. And the other vijnana, the chaku vijnana, gana vijnana, the jiva vijnana, the sota vijnana, and the kaya vijnana, we can only call them perception. Eye perception, nose perception, ear perception, and so on. Okay, so I hope that is clear. The mind actually puts it all together to produce the big picture. All right, I'll just give you a rough idea how we get to sense there is a world out there instead of just one sense, one sense organ sensing something. Let's look at a simple situation, right? You're walking in the park, and one evening or late afternoon, you want to take a stroll in the park. As you walk around the park, you see a dog approaching from a distance. It's a very nice looking dog. So you have seen the dog, and that is your eye perception. You have now seen a dog. Your mind has the mental image of the visual image of having seen a dog. As the dog approaches you, and you wave at the dog, and the dog is very happy and very cute. So it barks very sweetly a few times. Woo, woo, a few woofs. Now your ears hear the barking. And the barking sound is basically air vibration, and then your ear hears the barking, and it produces a mental image of a sound, the sound of the dog barking. Now your mind is aware that the dog is barking. And as the dog comes towards you, you realize this dog has been out in the park the whole afternoon. It is very sweaty. And you know what sweaty dogs smell like? And you begin to smell this foul smell of the sweaty dog. And you realize, ooh, yucks, this dog smells bad. So this smelling of the dog, that is your nose perception. You now have perceived the smell of a dog. And as the dog comes towards you, it's such a friendly dog. And you like this dog no matter how bad it smells. And the dog jumps on you, puts its paws on you. And what happens? Now you feel the touch of the dog. So your body is starting to feel the touch of the dog. And now your mind has this awareness of the touch sensation. So the body This is the body perception. Now you are aware that the dog is touching you, the touch of a dog. And you have this mental image that you have just touched this dog. You have seen the dog, you have heard the dog, you have smelled the dog, you now touch the dog, and you're very happy. Your face came too close to the dog. And of course, such a happy, good dog, the dog starts to lick your face. And as the dog licks your face, somehow your tongue tasted the saliva of the dog, yucks, you know. And tasting that, you suddenly recognize or you become aware that you have tasted the saliva of the dog. So all these are different experiences. Seeing the dog, hearing the dog, smelling the dog, right? Touching the dog, tasting the dog's saliva. You have a very complete set of experience, sense experience, individual sense experience put together. Now you have this complete picture that this is a very sweet, happy, cute dog, and happy to see you, and you're happy to play with the dog, you know. So there is this experience which represents a world, the objective experience. The dog is the objective experience. You experiencing it, you enjoying this, you liking this is the subjective experience, right? And so there is the objective experience, the subjective experience. Therefore, there is a world out there, and there is this thing called the self in here. So this is how the mind puts it all together and produces a complete experience. So I hope that is clear now what it all means, right? That Manovinyana puts it all together, produce a complete experience where you become aware of a world out there and a self in here. But realize that all this is mind-made, okay? All you had was experiencing each of the 5 senses. The rest was produced by the mind. So the perception refers to each of these 5 physical senses, and the cognition or consciousness refers to the mano vinyana, putting it all together. So I hope that answers this question. All right, so now we move on to the next question. How many different types of sankara are there? What is karmic construction? Actually, this is 2 questions. So I'll put the second one aside first. What is karmic construction? It's a little bit more complex. I will explain that later on. But let's deal with the first question. How many different types of sankara are there? Now, sankara, simply put, means construction, right? Putting together, putting things together. Like Bhante would describe it as putting bricks together to build the brick wall. That process of putting bricks together is the sankara. I would use the reference of jigsaw puzzle, putting each jigsaw puzzle piece together to make that big picture of the jigsaw puzzle, the complete picture of that, what that jigsaw puzzle represents. So putting it together, the process of putting them together is the sankara. We can be putting together visual images. We can be putting together thoughts. There can also be something happening in the body. So there are really 3 kinds of sankara. So sankara is the construction that basically affects the mind and body together, right? You cannot have the body without the mind. You cannot have the mind without the body. They are together. So sankara is really talking about these 3 types that affect the mind and the body. But I'm using the reference that we become aware of it in the mind, but it came through the body. Because you're seeing something, you're aware of what you're seeing. It came through the body. Your eyeball is in the body, right? Hearing a sound, you become aware, and that is because your ear is the part of the body, right? Your ear itself is not part of the mind; it's part of the body, but it triggers sensations and feeling and producing the notion that you've heard something, and that arises in the mind. So the arising, the awareness, the processing is all in the mind, but it relies on the mind-body interaction. So the first one is the chitta sankara, which is what we were talking about in this Panchakanda. So when we talk about the Panchakanda, we are referring to chitta sankara. That is the construction of the mental image, right? And this is what was perceived through the sense organs by putting together vedana and sanya in this process of perception. So we've already talked about this. So this is one type. The sankara in the Panchakanda is the chitta sankara. That is putting together vedana sanya, millions of vedana sanya constructed together to form the big picture, the mental image rupa. Right? It produced the awareness of a perception, that is the vijnana, but actually then it is represented, manifested in the form of a mental image, rupa. Then there is a second type. With every mental image perceived, there is identification. And that identification process interacts between two activities going on, vitakka, vichara. And the vitakka, vichara is then constructed into the awareness, the verbal awareness. I see a dog. The dog is very cute. All these are vachi sankara. Vachi sankara is construction of verbal. Now, the word verbal does not mean speech. Verbal means words produced in the mind. That's really what the word verbal means. It does not refer to physical speech that you say. It may result in speaking, but it's referring to the thoughts. And these thoughts arise with these two activities, vitakka, vichara. Right? Pandit Punnaji has explained this very thoroughly in the book Aryamagga Bhavana Level 3. So I suggest you, I've already given you the link before, so I suggest you look through that book. Right? So there you will find the explanation of vitakka, vichara. Okay? Basically, it's inquiry and inference. Vichara is the inquiry. When the eye sees an object, the mind asks, oh, what is this? Right? That what is this is the vichara. And then the mind interprets, that's a dog. That's the vitakka. So the vichara, vitakka constructed into a thought, that is vachi sankara. That thought is really the mental words you form, verbal, mental words that are formed, verbal in the mind. And the third type is the kaya sankara. Now, this is related to the respiration, construction of physical energy. Again, if you go to the book Aryamagga Bhavana Level 3, you will find Bhante Punnaji explaining all this. So I'll just give you a quick rundown on this. Kaya sankara is referring to the fact that, you see, when we breathe, now respiration is not the same as breathing. Breathing is just taking a breath in. Respiration is processing what you have breathed in. So the air that enters your lungs, the cells in the lungs go through a process of absorbing oxygen from the air and converting this oxygen into energy, and then passing this energy throughout the body through the bloodstream, sending the energy throughout the whole body. That process is the kaya sankara. Some people think that kaya sankara is just talking about the breathing. It's not. That's why it's using the word kaya. It's not just talking about the breath. It's talking about the whole body. So it's processing the breath into energy that is then relayed or transmitted throughout the whole body, sent through the whole body. So basically, it's construction of physical energy distributed throughout the body. This is really the real meaning of kaya sankara. Right? So these are the three main types of sankara affecting mind and body. But actually, there is also one more type which is not related to mind-body. At a very microscopic or nanoscopic level, down to the cells. Inside each cell, right, it converts the oxygen into energy. That process of converting air into energy, that tiny little process, that is called Ayu Sankara. A-Y-U, Ayu Sankara. But that, because it's by itself does not affect the mind. It's not a body mind. It is not at the body level. It is at a cellular level, a single cell. So that process in English is called metabolism. And that is ayu sankara, right? So that is not referred to as a regular form of sankara, because this regular form of sankara is talking about the mind-body interaction, and then the awareness is produced in the mind, because in the mind you become aware that you have energy, and that is called virya, the energy, right? That comes from kaya sankara. So I hope that is clear, the three types of sankara: chitta sankara, constructing vedana sanya; vachi sankara, constructing vitaka vichara. I'm sorry, I forgot to put the term vitaka vichara, but that's really what it is constructing, right? Verbal thoughts, right? Words form in the mind, vachi sankara. And finally, kaya sankara, the respiratory process that converts the air we breathe into energy, which is then distributed throughout the body. That's kaya sankara. Okay. So now let's take a look at this sankara process here. We know we've seen this many times. So basically, light reflected from the object enters the eyeball, stimulating the retina at the back of the eyeball. When we pay attention, we become aware, and that process of perception, the Paticca, produces a mental image. You have seen a dog, right? So that is as far as Paticca is concerned. And then this, in the Paticca, the sankara is the chitta sankara, the mental construction of color sensations, sanya, which is the jigsaw puzzle pieces, right, together with the vedana, the feeling, and into perceived object. Right? You now perceive an object, right? Having seen the dog. That construction, that sankara is the chitta sankara. At the same time, all this is just an experience. Now, remember this, because I'm going to explain the same thing later on, so I'm not going to refer back to this flow chart, this diagram here. But be aware, what you have just gone through is just an experience, right? Experience is called Dhamma. You have just experienced the seeing of a dog, right? So in the experience of seeing, there is only the seeing. But the mind likes to break it into two parts, and that process will help us identify there is a dog out there. Because then the mind begins to think, there is a dog out there, projecting the concept of an object identified as a dog out there. So the word dog is a label we assign to the mental image that we have just perceived. So the mind has the appearance of a mental image of a dog, and then we call it a dog. That's the nama, rupa, right? Rupa is the image in the mind. Nama is the name we give it, and that is the name is dog, right? And out there, we have now created this objective experience out there, the world, right? So the mind breaks it first by identifying the objective experience. So the mind breaks the experience into two parts. This process of breaking experience into two parts, the English word, the most appropriate English word is dichotomy. Dichotomy means to break something into two distinct parts. And what are the two distinct parts? Basically, being aware of this object out there. That is called the objective experience. Right? Being aware of a dog out there. At the same time, we think that there is something inside here that is being affected by this. So the other part is the subjective experience, the atta. The loka is the world, the atta is the self. All this is produced by mano vijnana. And this really is the true meaning of consciousness. There is a subjective experience, objective experience, that is consciousness, okay? Just seeing the dog alone is not consciousness. That is perception, okay? So I hope that also clarifies the earlier question again. So this is really what the mind does. It breaks it into two parts. It is mind created. This breaking is done by the mind. Right? So now the mind becomes aware and creates a concept, and this is the concept. Oh, what a lovely dog. How I wish I could keep him as a pet because it's such a happy, cute dog. That train of thought, that is words formed in the mind, verbal thoughts, that is vachi sankara. Okay, so now you can see the difference between the chitta sankara and the vachi sankara. Okay, so I hope that answers this question on the 3 types of sankara. Now moving on to the next question. Where does Panchakanda fit in the 4 Noble Truths? A very interesting question. Where does the Panchakanda fit in the 4 Noble Truths? Now I'm going to answer this in 2 parts. First, we will just deal with this first part, which relates to the first Noble Truth. Okay, so now let's take a look at the 4 Noble Truths, the Chattari Arya Sachani, right? The 4-fold supernormal realities. First, there is dukkha. Dukkha is commonly translated as suffering. It's very important that this has to be understood. There is dukkha. Okay. Then, of course, there is a reason how dukkha arises. There is the origin of dukkha, samudaya. And this has to be abandoned because this cause of suffering, we have to learn to give it up. Otherwise, we will continue to suffer. And this is the advice of the Buddha. And the third is, of course, all that can be brought to an end. And that is, there is an end to dukkha. And this has to be realized. That means we have to do something about it to bring this to fruition. And what can we do? Then the Buddha taught us the Eightfold Way, the Magga. Right? So basically, the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. This has to be cultivated and developed. So these are the 4 Noble Truths. As far as Panchakanda is concerned, it basically is very well explained inside the first Noble Truth. So in the first Noble Truth, the Buddha described there is suffering, there is dukkha, and there are 8 conditions of dukkha. The first 4 are very straightforward: birth, aging, illness, and death. All this we know cause dukkha. And then, of course, separation from what is pleasing is dukkha. That means if we have experienced something pleasant and then we lost it, we no longer have it. For example, your cell phone. If you lose your cell phone, that is dukkha, big time dukkha, right? Or unfortunately, for many people during this pandemic, they spend all their life, all their savings to build up a business. And in some cases, because of the pandemic, their business suffers great losses. So they used to enjoy profit. Now they are experiencing losses. They've lost the opportunity of making profit. That is dukkha. At the same time, not only losing the opportunity of making profit, union with what is displeasing, they end up suffering, right? They end up finding a lot of problems they have to deal with, stuck with things that they don't want. Union with what is displeasing, that is dukkha, right? So these are 6. And then the 7th is that we have a wish. Of course, in recent times, a lot of people are wishing, how I wish the coronavirus pandemic will stop tomorrow. I wake up tomorrow, there's no more pandemic. But that's not going to happen. So not to get what one wants or what one wishes for, that is dukkha. So these are the 7 conditions. But number 8 is really the mother of all dukkha. And this is where Panchakanda comes in. The Buddha said in brief, personalizing the 5 constituents of the process of perception is dukkha. And personalizing the 5 constituents of the process of perception is the term Pancha Upadana Kanda. Okay? Basically, the Upadana process of the Panchakanda. Panchakanda is the 5 constituents of the process of perception, or the 5 aggregates. Upadana means personalizing. Very quickly, this is found in Bante's book, but I've also explained this before. The term Upadana is made of 2 key words, Upa and adana. Upa means inside, within, right? That is within, not outside, but inside, upa, within. Adana. Adana has an A in front of the word dana. And we know what is dana. Dana is giving. When there is an A in front of the verb, it means the opposite of that action. So instead of giving, it is taking. Adana means taking. So upa adana means taking and bringing it inside. So what is that thing? That is called personalizing. And basically, the Buddha was warning us that we are personalizing the 5 constituents of the process of perception, personalizing the Paticca, the 5 aggregates. That is this statement here simply means is that every time we see something, we begin to think of it, whether we like it, we don't like it, and when we begin to react to it. So this liking and disliking, we are personalizing it. When you see a dog, what did you experience? All you ever experienced was just seeing the dog. But then your mind begins to think, oh, I like this dog. This dog is very cute. So you are personalizing it. And this personalizing process creates the notion there is a self that is being affected by this experience of seeing the dog. So there is the seeing. So this personalizing the seeing of the dog, and then personalizing the hearing of the cute sound made by the dog, the cute barking sound of the dog, right? The sweet barking sound, you know. So then you personalize it. Oh, I like that dog's barking. So we are personalizing everything we see, personalizing everything we hear, personalizing everything we smell, personalizing everything we touch, personalizing everything we taste. And then we begin to form concepts that it is something I like, I don't like, I want more of this, I don't want more of it. So the mind begins to react to it. And this is really the root of all suffering. So here the Buddha was warning us that when we see something, just realize that we have just seen something, we have just experienced something. Don't personalize and start to think that, oh, this is so nice, I like it. Don't think of it in terms of how nice it is, how terrible it is, how awful it is, you know. We read some news about somebody cheating somebody, then we get angry, you know. These are all personalizing that story, right? So basically, all these personalizing are suffering. So this is where the Panchakanda is related to the 4 Noble Truths. In the first Noble Truth, it's my own words, I call it the mother of all suffering. When you personalize everything you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, you are creating suffering for yourself. You see something, you say, I like it, I don't like it. Oh, it's so nice. How I wish I can keep it. In the end, you're creating suffering. Right? So I hope that answers the question, how Panchakanda is related, or how Panchakanda is being a part of the 4 Noble Truths, as in this case, the first Noble Truth. Okay, so I hope that question has been answered. So moving on to the next question. This actually came, I think, this morning from one of the brothers. Pleasant or unpleasant feeling, isn't I is involved? If otherwise, how to experience as pleasant or unpleasant? Actually, I think all the explanation I made in the past few questions, I have more or less already explained about the mind creating the I because it's breaking the experience into 2. But let me go through it again in all fairness to answer this question formally, properly, okay? So pleasant and unpleasant feeling when we experience a sensation, right? It is just the experience from this stimulation of sensations, which means if we see yellow light, right, or very bright light, it is unpleasant. Yellow and red light is very unpleasant. But if we see soothing, dim green or blue light, it's very pleasant. So all that is that we are experiencing the seeing of light, and in that seeing, the light has a soothing or an irritating effect. That's it. Pleasant or unpleasant is just an experience. Experience because the sense organs are reacting to it, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body. That's just an experience. Nothing more than that. This process of perception, the Paccakanda, is just a sense experience. Nothing more than that. We have experienced something. That's it. Or rather, there is an experience. I don't even want to say we have experienced. There is an experience of the Paccakanda, right? Being aware of an object, this experience. And people like us, unenlightened beings, invariably break every sense experience into the objective experience. I already explained that earlier. Something up, the object out there, and the subjective experience, the self in here, and perceiving the object, and that there is the self that is perceiving the object. There is a self that is affected by the feeling of the object. So this is all mind-made, breaking that experience into two parts. There is no self. The notion of this self is mind-made. And then we begin to react. Unenlightened beings react to everything they experience. So with the notion of a self affected by the sense experience, unenlightened beings invariably react to the experience. And there are three types of reaction. And this reaction is really tanha. Bhante translates the word tanha as emotional reaction. Not the tanha is not craving, because craving is not very accurate. Craving perhaps can only relate to one of the three types of tanha, the lust and the greed. But when it comes to anger and hatred, craving does not explain that at all. And when it comes to the delusion of the self, craving also doesn't explain it, right? So basically, tanha is emotional reaction. And the three types are kama tanha, emotional reaction towards pleasant experience. That means when the experience is pleasant vedana, then the emotional reaction is kama tanha. When the experience is unpleasant, then the reaction is vibhava tanha, emotional reaction towards unpleasant experiences. And then there is this emotional reaction towards existence, being aware that there is a world out there, or thinking that there is a world out there, there is a self in here, I exist, this self exists, there is this, then this is the bhava tanha. I'm going to explain this in more detail relevant to the Paticca Samuppada when we come to the Paticca Samuppada. If up to this point, you're still not very clear, whoever is interested in this question, if you're still not really very clear, just hold on to this. When we talk about the Paticca Samuppada, it will become clearer how this arises, because in Paticca Samuppada, we'll be looking at step by step how all this arises. I don't want to jump the gun and break into that because it's a very long discussion. Just explaining the Paticca Samuppada in properly takes 2 or 3 sessions. It's not a quick one session will do kind of thing. Okay, so I hope that answers basically, right, this question. I have already answered a big part of that question has already been answered with a lot of the earlier discussion. Right. Moving on to the next question. There's something wrong with my... Okay, there you are. Okay, I mentioned before this vedana feeling in the Paccakanda is not the same as liking or disliking something. That's a very valid question. A lot of people think that vedana, that feeling, is whether we like something or we don't. It's not. Liking and disliking is an emotional reaction. Vedana is not an emotional reaction. Vedana, with respect to the Paccakanda, is actually a sensory reaction. It is a reaction in the in the sense organ, the nerves in the sense organ. So it's actually the reaction of the nervous system, right? So basically Panchakanda deals with interaction between the nervous system and the brain. So this is the reaction in the nervous system to bright light, yellow light, red light, causing pleasant, unpleasant feeling. That is Vedana. But when it comes to what color do we like, it's a different ball game. It's an emotional reaction. Let's come to that in a moment, okay? In answering this, I will also be able to answer that question on karmic construction. So I will deal with that at the same time. So let's get on with answering this question. That Vedana in the Panchakanda is not the same as liking and disliking, which is an emotional reaction. Okay. So when we talk about Panchakanda, we're talking about the 5 senses carrying these signals into the brain to be processed through each of the sensory nerves, right? Sense organ nerves. So optic nerves from the eye, auditory nerves from the ear, and then we have olfactory nerves from the nose, and we have gustatory nerves from the tongue, and finally we have these somatosensory nerves from the body's touch receptors brought to the brain to be processed. Vedana is the reaction in these nerves. So as I pointed out, bright light causes optic nerves to be irritated. This got nothing to do with your thinking. Red light also irritates the optic nerves. Green and blue light soothe the optic nerves. High-pitched sound irritate the auditory nerves. Low-pitched sound soothe the auditory nerves. Right? So basically, it is processed in the brain, and the processing in the brain gives rise to the activity we call mind. And there are 3 parts of this mental experience. I've explained this many times, so I'm not going to go so deep. Very quickly, Vijnana is the perception of what has been perceived through the sense organ. Mano is the cognition and conception, identifying what has been perceived by assigning name and at the same time creating concepts, right? Cognizing the experience, creating concepts, and with concepts we have choices of what to do next, right? And chitta is the affective process commonly called the emotions, and this is leading to the mood and the temperament. Mood is about how we feel about something. Temperament is our reaction to it, and this is where the liking and disliking is. This is the emotional reaction called tanha to feelings, right? Vedana. Now here, I want to point out the Vedana I'm using here is not the Vedana in the Panchakanda. This is the Vedana of the experience, the feeling of the experience. You saw that dog with your eyes. You heard the sweet barking of the dog. And you come into contact with the dog because the dog now bounces on you, and you like that experience with the dog, interacting with the dog. You like that dog. So there is the liking from this experience. So you feel the pleasantness of that experience of seeing this cute dog, hearing the sweet barking, but you also have the unpleasant experience of smelling the smelly dog, and that is the unpleasant feeling, right? So all this experience leads to a feeling of the perception. This is not the feeling of the sense organ, but the feeling of the perception that, this dog is cute, you like it. So, it's a nice dog. The feeling is a good feeling. Now, then you begin to personalize that experience. So this is really those 3 parts of the mind. And that leads to the explanation of the second noble truth. So let's look at the second noble truth, the origin of dukkha, how we begin to experience dukkha. The first noble truth talked about the 8 conditions of dukkha, and we cling on. We cling on to the seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. And then we begin to react. This is the real cause of the dukkha. It's the reaction that is causing the dukkha. It is this tanha, commonly translated as craving, leads to the suffering. Tanha is translated by Bhante Punnaji as emotional reaction, not craving. It's not very accurate translation. So there are three types of tanha. Tanha for sensual pleasures, something pleasant. So this is really emotional reaction towards pleasant experiences and leads to a reaction called lobha. Lobha is lust and greed for pleasures. It is a pleasant experience. Now we want more of it, right? So this is the lust and greed. Lust turns into greed. So we begin to lust for something because it's pleasant. It's pleasant. I like it so much. Now I want it. Wanting it, that is lust. And when you begin to get what you want, you often want more. You don't say that's enough. You know, if you go to a durian party and you tasted one durian seed and it tasted good, are you going to say to the host in the durian party, that tasted very good, I like it, that's it, I'm not going to take any more, thank you? Are you going to do that? No, you want to take more. So lust turns into greed, right? So that is lobha. The second type of tanha is tanha for non-existence. That is basically vibhava tanha, the emotional reaction towards unpleasant experiences. And that is leading to a reaction called dosa. And this dosa is aversion and hatred towards displeasures. When you experience something unpleasant, every time you experience something unpleasant, the first thing you want to do is avoid it, right? You just want to get away from it. Either you move away from it or you push it out of the way. That is aversion. Now, if you keep doing that and it does not go away, it keeps coming back at you, then you begin to hate it. You get angry and you hate it. So aversion turns into hatred. That is dosa. The third type of tanha is the tanha for continued existence. And this is really bhava tanha. Because you have broken every experience into the objective experience and the subjective experience, you begin to create this notion that I exist in this world. I am experiencing the world. So this is really bhava tanha. This reaction, emotional reaction towards existence, making you feel and think in existential way. And this is moha, the delusion of a self-centered existence. All these are the reactions in the chitta, the emotional brain. Lobha, dosa, moha are called the three evil roots. So they are the reactions, emotional reaction, tanha. The three evil roots, the akusala mula. I already mentioned this earlier on. Kama tanha leads to the reaction of lobha, lust and greed. Vibhava tanha leads to the reaction of dosa, aversion and hatred. Bhava tanha leads to the reaction of moha, delusion of self-centered existence. Okay, so I hope that basically answers that part of the question, that liking and disliking is really an emotional reaction to the pleasantness of the experience, not just the each sense organ, but the whole experience. So overall, you like that dog you saw in the park because it's so cute and you want that dog as your pet. So that is really the liking and disliking part. Okay, let's take a look at the vicious cycle of emotions. Environmental activities, they stimulate our sense organs. And then we become aware of the perception. And we begin to create thoughts and concepts and start to think of it either as something pleasant or unpleasant. Let's assume that we experience something unpleasant, right? So in this case, we interpreted what is happening as something unpleasant. And that unpleasant experience arouses the emotion. So arousal of emotions, and there is a mind-body connection. Right? This mind-body connection basically leads to the release of hormones. So when you get excited and because your emotions are aroused negatively, it releases a lot of stress hormone. and causing discomfort in the body. So now your body is feeling uncomfortable, and this stress reaction is called freeze, fight, or flight reaction. So it's really a bodily discomfort, stress reaction. And then this disturbs the mind. When there is stress reaction, it disturbs the mind. So there is a mental disturbance called distress. Stress leads to distress. Because of the stress, your mind is disturbed. The body disturbed by hormones is stress. The mind disturbed by this discomfort is distress. And then the mind begins to carry all kinds of negative thoughts. Now you have emotional reaction, negative emotional reaction. All kinds of emotional states arise. And as your emotional states arise, you do something and you can't get rid of the problem, and actually it leads to very strong reaction, because you now personalize the whole experience and say, I hate this. I'm so angry with what's going on. And that you're feeding the emotions and making it worse. All this is suffering. So you're really suffering. It's really big time dukkha going on. So what is happening in the first part is vijnana. Environmental activities stimulate the sense organ. You become aware of something. That is vijnana. You begin to interpret. And the part of the mind that does the interpretation is the mano. You begin to interpret your circumstances. And now your emotions are aroused, chitta. And when chitta is aroused, it triggers a chain reaction causing biochemical reactions in the body. And that starts to disturb the mind. And now you want to react to it, tanha, right? Then the tanha leads to big time anger and hatred. This is the extreme already, right? And this is upadana. You now personalize that experience so much. I am so angry with what's going on. So this is really the whole vicious cycle of emotions. How does all this translate into the construction of karma? Now let's take a look at flowchart in a different way. The process of experience. Experience is a chain reaction. When environmental activities stimulate the sense organ, we become aware of perceptions. And with this awareness of perception of each sense organ, we put it all together to have a complete experience of what we have just experienced. And this complete experience is the manoviññāna. So now we have the experience. And the mind interprets what has been experienced by comparing it with past, categorized past memory. And when it begins to compare to past memory, it starts to give more meaning, creating more concepts, right? Recognizing that experience. Now you begin to think that experience is either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Actually, there's no neutral. It's pleasant or unpleasant or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. But the term neither pleasant nor unpleasant is too long, so people call it neutral. Okay, so that actually triggers your emotions, your chitta. The affective process arises and triggers a chain reaction because of the hormones being released. Now your body is all tensed up. This is tensions in the body because of hormones, biochemical chain reaction, biochemical reactions in the body. And that causes the body to be all tensed up. And that you feel this stress. So now you're feeling this tensions in the body, is stress. And that stress is really a painful experience in the body, dukkha, right? So that is the dukkha, the stress. And then at the same time, it arouses your emotions, and your mind, your thoughts begin to carry away. The thoughts arising, that is the vachi sankara. Right? I spoke about that before. The mind begin to create all kinds of thoughts, right? And these thoughts are basically arising from your memory, your imagination, your expectation, leading to the three evil roots, lobha, dosa, moha, lust and greed, or anger, hatred, or delusion of self-centered existence. disturbing your thinking mind. See, this, the cloud in purple, this is really the emotional, the mind, disturbing the thinking mind. The emotional mind is disturbing the thinking mind. The chitta is disturbing the mano. The two are fighting. There is no peace in your mind. This process is called domanassa, distress. So now you're experiencing distress, in the mind. And this distress leads you to react. Your reaction, your tanha. You want to react. The wanting to react is cetana. Cetana is the volition, the intention. Now you want to do something. If it is something unpleasant, you want to get rid of it. If it is something pleasant, you want to get more of it. You get greedy over pleasant things, and you get angry over unpleasant things. Lobha, dosa, moha, reaction. Now your intention, your cetana, you want to do that, your volition. Now you have a thought of wanting to do that. And then you begin to take action, unskillful action, akusala karma. The unskillful action creates outcomes. Whatever it is, when you do something, whatever action you take, you create outcome, consequences, vipaka. And consequences that you created eventually come back to haunt you. And it can haunt you immediately. Right? It can affect you immediately. That's why I draw the arrow pointing back to stimulate your perception, because now you're experiencing the consequences of your action. But this feedback, this consequence can also happen later on, not right away. Or it can happen at the end of your life, when you are about to your whole body begin to cease and you then pass away. Or in your next life, where you are reborn, or the way you live, your life goes through in the next few lives even. Right? So it can affect you in so many different ways. This is basically how karma is constructed. When we perceive something, we begin to interpret it and give meaning to it. And then we begin to experience it is pleasant or unpleasant. We like it, we don't like it, we hate it, we love it. Then we have this emotional reaction, the chitta. And then we begin to want to do something about it, the cetana, the volition. And then we start to take action. We are creating consequences. This is basically how karma is constructed, in plain, simple language. Okay, I hope this makes sense. I hope this is helping you, right? So I hope this has explained adequately those questions. So if you have any more questions, please post them now. Right, so I have come to the end of the sharing. So remember to download the PowerPoint slides, tiny.cc/awakening3. Okay, and if you have questions later on, you can always send to me through email or through Facebook. If you have Facebook account, you can message to me. So basically, this is the end of my sharing. Let me see if there are questions. So far, I don't see any. I have some nice comments from you all. Since I don't see any questions, I just post some of the nice comments. Thank you very much, Sister Shanti. You have always been very kind. Thank you so much. So I hope you are staying safe, keeping well. And we have another nice, I'm waiting for questions, so I'm just posting all the nice comments. So I'm happy that you are all enjoying this, and that you are all benefiting from it. And we have, of course, some very good friends saying hello. And of course, we have our friends being grateful. And okay, so that comes to the end of the sharing. There are no questions coming up. So, okay, we spent the last 1.5 hours together, more or less, sharing the Buddha Dhamma, and we have made this very productive and accumulated some good karma. We also know that a lot of people around the world are suffering. Our neighbors, our friends, near and far, suffering from the coronavirus pandemic. So let us put our palms together, share our merits, and dedicate to the people who are suffering from coronavirus pandemic. We dedicate the merits we have acquired from sharing the Buddha Dhamma to all beings affected by the coronavirus pandemic around the world. May suffering beings be suffering free. May the fear-struck fearless be. May grieving beings shed all grief. May all beings find peace and relief. By the grace of the merits we have acquired, may we never follow the foolish. May we follow only the wise until we attain the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm very happy that so many of you have joined in. Thank you. Please stay safe. May you be well, comfortable, peaceful, and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.